Thank you all. As you said, I'm Tony Aiuto from ICS. We'll be talking today about migrating applications from OSF Motif to Qt. And my agenda for today is talk very briefly about our experience and why we're up here giving this talk. We'll do an overview of different options you have for conversions, a set of common issues that you will see no matter what choice you take for getting from here to there. A set of first steps, our suggestions about where you should begin the process. I'll do some examples, and these two are probably in the wrong order. I'll be talking about automation tools to help the process and give some examples of how you do certain things by hand and how the tools work. And we'll begin with our experience. ICS is, oops, how'd we get that far? Okay. Oh, do you want to do the slides or me? Oh, okay. No, this is the right one. ICS was founded in 1988, doing XT and then Motif consulting. For the last few years, we've been the primary development organization for OSF. We're also the primary group behind Open Motif, so we do that. Qt, we've been a partner with Trolltech for a few years. We've been the primary training partner in the U.S. We resell some widgets from KDAB. We have our own widget set. Personally, I've been doing Motif for 15 years or so, sometimes with and without ICS. Our new hires, all our new U.S. hires in the past 2 years have been Qt guys. So we're migrating ourselves from Motif to Qt slowly. We have a lot of legacy Motif customers, and they've been coming to us for advice and sometimes just services to get their applications moved from Motif to Qt. Slides? Okay. Oh, we did it twice again. I think if you do it, that's fine. Right, I'll just say slide and you press the button and then everything will be fine. There are really only three major options. Totally rewrite the application, which sometimes makes sense. We'll come back to the reasons why you do that. Converting just the GUI. If you're fortunate enough to have an application that's well designed and you've got an application data model and you have a separate GUI and there's a clean demarcation between the two, you can just rewrite the Motif GUI in Qt. You have to be lucky because our experience is that there are very few applications that well written. And a migration path where you run Motif code and Qt code together in the same address space. We find that works for a lot of things, and I'll do some particular examples about that today. Along that axis of three choices, you can do things by hand, you can do some automatic conversions of things, and we have some tools to help with that, which we'll talk about throughout the talk. I've pretty much actually said this on the last slide, but I do want to talk for a second more about the migration. It allows you to do a slow port. If you really have to, stop the hemorrhaging in Motif. You can't find Motif programmers. You believe Qt is the way to go. You can blend it in slowly over time. Very important, it runs in the same address space, and the Qt Motif widget provides this magic bridge between the two. I have a question for Trolltech. It is in the separate solutions section, so is there a licensing problem about using it? Or if you buy commercial Qt, do you get the right? And that's something I don't know the answer to. Okay, we'll do that later. Slide. Okay, so we only got one change. Okay. Okay, I'll change it then. Okay. The common issues that we see in all of these ports are often a change of C to C++. Motif applications are old. They're often in C. If you're not migrating because you want to change operating systems, the chance of moving to Qt gives you the option of changing operating systems, and that'll affect some of the work you do early. Layout and geometry management are done differently And it's very easy to use Qt's geometry management, but it's different. So if you've got a Motif mindset, you got to figure out how to get from here to there. If you have a small number of dialogues, it's not a problem. Some of these Motif apps have hundreds of dialogues, and it's painful to do them all by hand. Internationalization is again an issue because Qt has good facilities, Motif has some facilities, but they don't map together one-to-one. X applications used, position that mic better. I'll try to talk like that. They used resource files for a lot of things. In Qt, you've got styles and things like background colors changed in palettes. That's a difference, although now Qt4 adds the style sheet systems, which is very interesting, and we've got some examples merging that with resources. And your build system. It may change, you may want to change it, or you may have a legacy build system that doesn't work well with Qt. Okay. All right. First we'll talk about issues with C to C++ transition. Your old code, if you've got a Motif app, is very often ancient C. There are fewer C++ applications than you'd like. The old C code is sometimes pre-ANSI. It has no prototypes. Even code that was ANSI can be ugly. In our own personal pain was we recently acquired a product from one of our competitors, UIMX, and they had for years compiled the thing with all prototypes turned off. So though they had function headers that defined prototypes for things, they weren't really using them. And when we did Linux ports of it and turned on the prototyping, it took at least a week of someone's time to go through and fix everything to make it compile correctly. You have old code that may be C++, but it's an old C++. Again, our own pain is we've been using Rogue Wave libraries and Builder Accessory for years. And as we started doing Linux ports, every time we got a new Linux release, it would come with a new G++, and Rogue Wave would fail to compile. So we have to keep updating that. If you're taking an old legacy app using an old C++ framework, you may find that that's a nasty piece that you didn't expect. This is an opportunity. View it that way. It's not an opportunity, it's pain. It's a chance to refactor your old code. Start disentangling the C globals, turn them into classes for each dialogue, and build an application data model. We find that early in the process, start making things private variables and start building interfaces around things. And that'll help make your code better anyhow, whether you've got a Qt or Motif front end. OS changes are often a factor in these migrations. Generally, we're not finding customers coming to us because they want it to be Qt. They want it to be portable to other operating systems, or they just want to update their own OS. I mean, we have people using Motif applications that they've built on HP UX 10, and they can no longer keep building them on new hardware. And they'll blame Motif along the way and say, well, when you switch to Qt, it'll be portable on things. And that's fine. We're happy to help them do the migration. But you're going to see as you change OSs completely, like Windows, or change within the same family, you'll end up with different compilers. You may have different networking protocols, certainly different threading models between things. Our advice here is to start very early. The day someone mentions the word Qt in your organization, you can start bringing your code to other places. Bring it over to Windows, see if it compiles, see what's going to happen, and that'll help with an assessment later on. And actually, I realize now, I forgot something I wanted to do very early in the talk. We talked about our experience, but I want to see, by some show of hands, if I can see what you are out in the audience. My guess is you're one of two camps. You've either got Motif applications, and you're learning Qt, and you're faced with going home to your management and saying how much it's going to take to port them, or you Qt consultants looking to pick up business porting old applications. And I just can I see, how many are in that first camp? You've got Motif apps and want to convert them? Okay, and people are secretly raising their hands, and everyone else is the other, or? Okay, so it's about half and half. And I'll try to direct the slant of topics based on that division. Where are we? Layout and geometry management is something that it's just different. Motif apps, as those of you who are Motif programmers know, depend way too heavily on the XM form widget, which was just a tour de force in throwing lines of code at trying to solve a problem rather than solving it elegantly. Motif uses its nested horizontal vertical boxes to lay things out. And putting fixed spaces and stretchers between things within boxes really works a lot better. If you've got one or two dialogues, it's easy to hand convert them. If you've got hundreds of dialogues, rebuilding them all by hand means really laying them out from scratch by hand. So we've been working on automatic tools to capture user interfaces and translate them to the Qt, but it's painfully hard to do that semantic mapping of what a form layout is into boxes. One of the things we've built, or we're working on, and we've got an early prototype of it, is a XM form work-alike for Qt. So a lazy programmer could sit, use one of these forms for their layout, throw in Q widgets, and do the same Motif attachments and get the same visual behavior. I'll show for a second some of the kinds of pain you have trying to figure this out automatically. And there's a big ICS is probably culpable for some of the pain you see because we provide a GUI builder. And GUI builders help you lay out code, but they allow you to make some sloppy things happen very easily. If you were doing code by hand and you wanted this layout of 6 things that all were attached in that distance, the right way you do it is you'd place that guy, you'd place him, and you'd do an attach left widget here, for this guy attached to here at some fixed distance of this. And to get the tops to line up, you would do an attach opposite widget for the top attachment of him and attach to him, and you'd give a 0 displacement, and then they would line up, and as you move that would move in lockstep. And then you'd do the same for that and that and that and that, and you'd attach this guy to that guy with a top attachment, and all 6 would move around. And if you're working in a GUI builder, you might get this first one right, and then you place these 2, and then you put this guy down and you attach him to the wrong top widget necessarily, or here you attach him to the wrong side of this widget, because the way we do it in ours is you start a drag here and you drop down. If you drop down here, it attaches right. If you drop down a little too far over this way, it attaches to the wrong end. And the application works great, but the code that's generated is really ugly. And if you're trying to map that back automatically to a proper box layout, it's hard. So we've abandoned that, and we're going with a form solution. Internationalization is another issue that frequently comes up. Motif had 2 separate ways of doing it: resource files and message catalogs. The problem is neither maps to Qt directly. Qt combines the 2 in a very nice way with the TR function, where you have a visible label within TR, and dynamically you can look up the right internationalization. There's another use we see, and I'll mention for a second. So many of our customers, at least, who are using Motif, do classified work, and they use the same structure, and it's very important to them to have a version of the application that has labels that are completely meaningless. So they make buttons, or they'll make a pull-down menu, and they'll label it with a thing saying selection, and they'll use this throughout their application, and they'll have choices A, B, and C. And developers work with that, and they don't actually internationalize it at all, because it's not for international purposes. They'll have a separate group of developers writing a resource file to that. And there they'll put in that the button in this particular dialog labeled selection is threat type, and the choices A, B, and C become different types of fighter aircraft someone might see. And I mention this because it sounds like plain internationalization, but they purposely try to obscure any semantic meaning to the names of the buttons in the application. So whatever you do for a solution has to preserve that obscurity, which makes things a little harder. Doing these mappings of resources, there is a lot of room for automating things. We have built and deployed QRM, which is a Qt resource manager, which gives you essentially the equivalent of X resource files for Qt. So we can dynamically load and alter anything that's a property of a widget. Motif TUI is an interface capture tool, which links into your application and dynamically captures the Motif hierarchy you're building and then emits designer files. One of the things that does is merge in runtime resources. So if you have code that just mentions buttons with no labels, we can get the labels in so your designer file has the right labels. And it's certainly possible and fairly easy to build tools to convert your message catalogs into something linguists can use. Forgot Unicode versus multibot. If you've got applications using large font lists, Asian applications in Motif, you're going to have to, it's pretty painless. You're going to throw out that code and just use the Unicode features of Qt. So you're going to win there. You're going to have multi-byte string conversions. They're going to go away. It's just so much easier to Qt, so it's pretty much a non-issue. Excuse me. Another differentiator is resources versus styles. Many Motif applications do all their background colors, their foreground colors, their fonts, they're in resource styles. Qt buried that in palettes, and you find some very garish Motif applications. And they're really easy to do when you can change the application colors in the resource file. It's a little harder in Qt. In Qt 4.2, the style sheet feature is really neat. So what was painful when we started writing these slides has become, in the last few weeks, much less painful to translate. And we're happy about that. And my advice on this is, don't worry about it. It's by the time you finish your application port, it will be really easy to get all your coloration done right. It's going to be one of the smallest problems you see, although it's something that management likes to see early. They say, why don't you have the stop button in red? You can just push them back on that. It can always be fixed later. Build systems. This is one of those things it's a matter of often taste and will to do something rather than necessity, but you've got legacy build systems for your Motif apps, and they're probably make-based or GNU-based make, hopefully not iMake-based. You're not going to find people using Ant or SCons or AutoConf that much, at least for the older Motif apps. There's going to be some pressure to switch to QMake, especially if you want to start porting your application to other platforms. So if you've got a Solaris app, which very often we see that, you've got old Solaris apps, can we make it run on Windows? You're going to want to get away from Make and switch to QMake. You don't have to do this all at once. You can do it slowly. If your application is split up between a separate GUI and a back end, you can keep the back end using your old legacy system for a while, start building the GUI with QMake. And now we have two statements which are seemingly contradictory, that everything makes it harder to do this. And both of them, we've had our own pain with. Older Motif apps are crufty. Very often they've started, our own code has started on Solaris 4 for a lot of it. And the builds have gone on over time. And for Solaris 2.1, someone will come out and find that things don't compile, and they throw in another define. And then 2.5 comes out, and they throw in another few defines. And we do an AI export, and a few more defines get put into things. And we have these make files that have stuff that's accreted, and everyone's afraid to throw anything out and refactor it to see what you really need right now. If you go straight over to QMake, you're going to find you're bringing along things you don't want. Now, we solved that problem by building our essentially own QMake-like system. We built it, and this happens in customers all the time. They say there's too much crap in the make files. Let's abstract that down into a corporate-wide build system. We'll take all the knowledge, push it down into something so people can write make files that are essentially no more complex than a .pro file. And in our case, we've done that. One of the particular things we do is when we're building on Hewlett-Packard, we always ship our products with 2 compiler flags that say, compile for generic PA RISC architecture. So it'll run on any machine. Optimize it for PA RISC 2, which is what people actually own. And that's important for us because that's the way we ship libraries. It's not important for most people because they only compile on one platform and ship on one platform. So it's not going to be found in QMake or AutoConf or any of the automatic tools, those 2 flags. So now when you're coming in as a third party trying to migrate this application, you'll see a very clean make file. And you go, oh, I can make a .pro file of that in 5 minutes. And you convert it, and you find out the application doesn't run because the build system has been providing flags. So what you have to do on those is actually go and run through the Unix make, see the actual commands that get executed, and then figure out whether you have to add things to the make specs on your corporate platform to make QMake do the same thing your legacy make system was doing. It's a tedious process, but it is mentally straightforward. And it's really affected by the number of build folders you have for the system. Some things are small, some can number into the hundreds of separate folders where make files exist. Okay. We've covered a bunch of issues that crop up. And so now where do you begin when you think you want to do a port? And the first step is really assessing the size of the problem you have. It's good to go through the number of modules. To me, that's an application directory. Number of source folders. Well, source folders is really an application directory. You want to see that split of application logic versus GUI code. With luck, you'll have modules that are purely GUI, and it's good to take those immediately and see if you can take 1 or 2 and write Qt equivalents. And then from your experience with that, try to extrapolate out based on the number to give you some time estimate of what you're looking at to do a conversion of the full interface. You're going to want to look at your C++ levels and see how much pain you have there. You want to count the number of OS-specific parts. As I said before, networking code and threading code in particular. And your best option is to probably use the Qt equivalents whenever possible, but that may demand you throw out blocks of really application logic and rewrite that. And you can probably use the old code, but that's going to prevent you from porting to other OSs. Third-party and custom widgets are often an interesting problem, often the showstopper problem. If you've used things like the XRT graph pack or even ICS's widgets, you're either going to have to find Qt equivalents or build your own. Fortunately, it's very easy to build custom widgets in Qt. So that is an option, but you don't want to go building your own graph package. So if you're dependent on Kale's XRT set, you're going to have to find an equivalent for Qt. You want to look for hidden nasty problems. Oh, we've got the man here, so we can tell whether this is true or not. When we started these slides, the documentation clearly said that the Qt Motif extension only works Linux, only tested. Okay. 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 So let's cross that off because there was no way to test that theory easily. Well, your old and custom third-party widgets might be Motif 1.x, but that's not going to matter too much anymore. As I talked about earlier, your old C++ code may not work on the platforms that you want to move to, so you're going to have to test that. And Qt may simply not build on your old platform. Some people, at least some of our customers, are still using SunOS. And you're grimacing, but they are. And they want to get their application code migrated before migrating off of SunOS because they still have to deliver. And they can't just cut over in one shot. So that's an interesting nasty, and that's going to wag the tail wagging the dog there. So where do you start in this assessment problem? I like to begin with immediate code refactoring. It always helps because it'll make your code cleaner. Start doing a C++ port of your code. Take the logic that's intermingled with your GUI, start splitting it out. If you're on a legacy platform, do a Linux port. Assign one guy, take your code over to Linux, see what happens. And if you intend to keep any of your application code, these things are going to help you get a leg up on the process. And after you've done this assessment, you've looked at the things, you've seen how much pain you have, finally you're going to have to pick a strategy. And whether it's a slow migration, a conversion, or rewrite. So if you've found you've got a large application and there's no clear break between the GUI and the application code, and that's an indicator for slow migration. And if it's a GUI builder built application, you very often may find that because it's really easy to do this logic under the button kind of thing, where you plunk a push button down. Modulates a lot. You plunk a push button down, you double click it to open up a code editor, you put in code and it modifies your data models directly right there. And then you generate code and you get this block that is hard to separate because you've done too much work in the push button callback. If you start finding those and you really don't care about porting, you just don't want to do any more development in Motif, then you want to go the slow migration route. If you have a very clean separation between your GUI and your backend, you might be able to do a pure quick conversion of the GUI. One way to tell is look through your modules that are supposed to be application data model, and if you see X and header files being included, it'd probably not be as easy as you'd think. So you want to look for, if your data model can compile without X, you've got a good candidate there. People who've been generating C++ code from their GUI builders are generally in better shape to do one of those because most of the GUI builders put the widget hierarchy creation and the logic in completely separate files. And on occasion, you're just going to get code you have to rewrite from scratch. If you find a 20K line file and it's got GUI and application logic mixed together, it may be hopeless. Earlier I said do the C and the C++ port. If that little pilot project failed and the guy you assigned to it couldn't convert the code, forget the rest. Rewrite it. You're just better off doing that. So for the rest of this, mostly I'm going to focus on migration. And originally I was going to do a walkthrough of a migration using the Qt Motif extension. But you can read that on the Trolltech site. You have to look, you'll find it if you do a web search for, I believe the title is Qt Motif Example Migration. If you search for that, you'll find it. It will be in the Qt 3.3 docs for reasons that are too long to go into. Their code has some good examples. You can read that for a technique of how to do it. My warning is it's sort of like a home improvement show, though. You show very quickly how you can do this thing, and it takes only 20 minutes to replace your bathroom. But in reality, you know it's a multi-day project. And I'm going to be guilty of doing the same sort of thing here, doing it in 20 minutes. Our advice on this is get your code to compile with G++. Start converting to QMake. The Trolltech documents say do it in the other order. I like doing the C++ conversion first because you at least have something you know will build. Step 3 is the important part. That is where you add a Q application to your main function, and you start putting your Motif widget trees under Qt Motif widgets. The Qt Motif widget is a piece of magic. It is a Q widget that also has in it a full Motif. Is it a manager or top-level shell? It's a top-level shell. A top-level shell widget class structure. And there's a member function Motif widget on this Q widget that gives you back an XT structure that you can use as a parent for any widget tree. So the big step, you have to make put that foot in the Qt water at step 3. And you'll probably have to rejiggle your main function a little. At this point, you're probably compiling with QMake so you get the right libraries, and at least you'll see your application link. The next step is to replace an easy dialog or two. Pick a file selection box, maybe even just start with an error message, and re-implement it in Qt. And you'll see them happening. You can show it to your boss, and they'll know it's possible. So even if you're going to rewrite the application, you might want to try this just to see that it is possible to have Qt running in your environment, because you may find yourself in a situation where you're trying to sell replacing your code to your management, and they don't know what choice is right. Do they keep with C and use Qt, or do they go to Java or just .NET and run on Windows only? Once you've got some dialogues replaced, you sit back and assess your progress. You have all sorts of options now. You can migrate the rest of the dialogues that are easy and then slowly migrate up the code that calls them. You may declare victory at that point because you're now able to stop programming with Motif, and you can build all your new code in Qt. And that may be the only goal that you have. And certainly we see some of our customers doing that. They just can't buy Motif programmers anymore. And one of the things I like to do personally is replace all the STL, if you've got it in your application, with the more Java-like Qt equivalent classes. I don't care who I offend. I was never a fan of STL. It doesn't feel natural for many things. So I like going to Qt for that. We'll do some examples of things that pop up and ways to handle them. Certainly the make to QMake transition should be easy, but many make files do a few things that they're not covered in the basic QMake tutorials. One of the big ones is custom rules. Make files constantly have custom rules. Let's say you've got a state machine and your own state machine compiler. You've got this text file that does something and then generates a piece of C. Well, how do you do that in QMake? The example here is, here we've got a module, help.o is dependent on that, and some rule to do it. And that was in make. In QMake, you can take any target, in this case help.o, and say dot commands after it. Put whatever you want after it. And then this little secret variable, QMake extra targets, you add in the target you want, and you get a custom rule. So I saved you an hour worth of looking right there. Some other variables that you should learn, because they'll help, are pre-target dependencies. If you've split up your application into a lot of folders and your GUI exists in one and the rest of your thing is your old build system, you'll want to use the target dependencies to say that your final target is dependent on some library over here. So if you go and rebuild this thing knows that it has to relink. Pre and post link are great for working with usually your continuous integration system or the meta build system around things. We put timestamps in our libraries every time we build them. The pre-link step is great for doing something right before that final link, so you can build a timestamp file. Post-link might be used to notify some logging process that the build completed successfully. And QMake clean is the place the variable you add to clean up that intermediate file generated by your state machine compiler a little earlier. What should you do when you're doing your C to C++ migration? The obvious thing, and you can start on this at the Motif end early to help make the rest of the Qt port easy, is to get a separate class for each GUI window, each dialog of your application. Take any callbacks you saw, start making them static methods. And when you do that, probably your application won't link anymore. And then you know you've got a bad linkage between two modules that should have been made a little more formal. We'll talk about how to correct that in a second. You've got to protect any variables that are sitting global with various getters and setters. Your setters essentially become slots in the long run. You want to create an application model that separates your GUI from what's happening to the data. And as I said before, the data model shouldn't need to include any Motif headers. And if you've done that, you've got a much better chance of being able to convert that interface to Qt. What I recommend for your callbacks, and the example does something like this too, is to take any code that's in an XT callback. Because most XT callbacks don't use the client data that's passed in, except if they're passing in a pointer to a C++ class. Like to define a slot, or at least just a member function that has no parameters, take all the code that was in the callback, move it into this new member function, and then have the old XT callback call that member function. And what that will do is your member function is now something you can turn into a slot and you can attach a signal to from through regular Qt mechanisms, and your old callback is what you use for Motif widgets that want to be called. And eventually, no one will be doing an XT callback call, talking to that callback, and you can throw that code away. One more thing to watch out for, which I didn't mention here, is as you start this slow migration, you're going to have data that comes from Motif that's allocated with XT new. And you've got to free it with XT free, and all your Qt objects are going to be allocated with new, and you've got to free them with free. And it's really easy to mix them up if you're not careful. So you've got to do this coloring algorithm to figure out where things come from and not free stuff the wrong way. If you're lucky, you'll core dump quickly. If you're not lucky, it'll take a few 100,000 operations more before you dump core, and you won't know why. Let's talk for a while about tools to help the process. What separates us from the other species is our love to use tools. And certainly I don't want to do large conversions by hand. I'm lazy. I like something to do it for me. I'd rather write the tool to do the conversion than do it myself. What we aspire to is a pure source-to-source conversion, where you can take Motif code, run it through some process, and come out with an equivalent Qt program. That ain't going to happen, but it's the model we build against. If you've got a GUI builder created application, something made with BX or UIMX or XDesigner, it's feasible, and we've done some work ourselves on building custom code generators to at least emit a designer file that will get you the user interface. It won't probably migrate the code in the callbacks as well, but you could certainly try to do that. UIMX, you may be a little better off because they actually put the code in the file. In BX, we keep the code in separate places, so it's a little harder to merge together. We've been working on a tool to do a binary conversion. The Motif to UI program is one that you link. It's not really a program, it's a library. You link with your Motif application. It captures the dynamically generated widget tree and emits a designer file. The Cutie resource management library is a tool for all those people who have big resource files. It works pretty well, and we'll do some examples of that. Another thing you can help with is, or that can help you, is Motif work-alike widgets. We've done the XM form. We're going to keep working on that. It's not available for public release yet. We may be doing a few more, especially for some of the weird newer Motif widgets that don't have an exact Qt analog. We don't know whether we actually will release these. It depends on the market for them. It's so easy to build things in Qt that, are we running out of time? That you might want to just rebuild them by hand. Let's go on. I will talk about the Motif to UI thing very quickly. You start with your application source. You recompile with a special set of includes, and it's an optional step. It allows us to get a little more information. It produces a .o, which we link on top of Motif, our library, and XT. This can actually capture any XT application. It doesn't have to be Motif. You get a little snapshot button. This is a lie. It actually generates a generic user interface description, which then we pass through a tool that maps from Motif widget names and semantics to a designer file. As I mentioned before, this is interesting because it does that merge of static resources, which may have come up in the files, with the elements that get created. And sometimes those mappings are not obvious because the resource file matching syntax allows all the wildcardings of things, and it's not always easy to figure out what line in the resource file matches up with a button in a piece of code, unless you can look at that piece of code and figure out the parentage. If you're the original programmer, it's easy. If you're the poor guy 15 years later who's trying to convert it, it's hard to figure out. So the good points about this, it's a very quick starting point in your porting effort. You can take your existing code, run it through this, get a designer file, show it to your boss, and say, here's what it will look like in Qt. As I said, it captures the resources. The drawbacks of it are, some of the mappings are hard, if not impossible. Going from the forms to vertical and horizontal layout boxes is hard. And sometimes we hit these dead ends that we can't do. Motif resources, in reality, are numbers very often for things. XML alignment is a good example. Its values are 1, 2, and 3, and there's a define in your code and a converter that converts the string left to 1 and center to 2 and right to 3. And a lot of times widgets are sloppy and don't have the proper reverse converter that converts a 1 to a left. So our tool here has to figure out that if we have a 1 and it's on alignment, that we should emit the string left for other people. Custom and third-party widgets are very sloppy with providing the backwards definers. So very often our tool just will find something. Microline had a good widget where they added some things to XML alignment. They have 10, 11, and 12 defined to be something. And our capture tool, at the best it can emit is a 12. You go, what the hell does a 12 mean? So, though I like this technique, it is limited in certain respects. And that thing has been here all the time. Let's get that off. The Qt Resource Manager, we like this tool. We've actually built it for a customer, have deployed it, want to make it generally available for resale. You just take your X resource files. You have to do some pretty mechanical massaging to them. We're working on actually eliminating most of that. And then you can use them again in a Qt application. If you do your internationalization that way, this is a natural fit. There are some limitations. It requires you to have the Qt3 support, which is supposed to exist all of Qt4. I don't know if it's end of life at the end of Qt4 yet, but maybe by then we'll have a better solution. You have to create your Qt widgets with the names being assigned, and it can only set properties. So text of a label you can set, but the background color you can't because that has to go through the palette. And it's still in development now, so it's not necessarily available to you. So as I wrote this slide originally, background couldn't be set. But with 4.2, we've eliminated that restriction because they've added style sheets. What? Yes, that's right. That's the key word I said. Properties. Style sheets are properties. Here's how you end up using it. It's fairly straightforward to link in. You include one little header, you include QRM, and here's where we get the limitation and drawback. You have to use this constructor that gives you a parent and gives you the name for a widget. And in your application defaults file, we say, this is the name for the widget, the title widget. I say title text property is hello world. And when this displays, you get hello world displayed. The mechanical massaging I referred to is that in your current X resource file will say label string rather than text. And though we have the syntax in there to say when I see label string on a XM text or on an XM label widget, I should set the text property of the corresponding Qt widget. I wonder if you can read this example, but this is something we just threw in at the last second when I got my Qt2 build going. Since style sheets are now properties, and we can set properties through resource files, we're able to do this horrible looking interface up here, where, and this is real code, it came off my Linux machine the other day. I've set in this app defaults file, I'm not sure if I need autofill background true anymore on this, but we've set the hello world, and I'm a very long label string. Pieces of text here. We've turned on word wrap because that's true. I didn't have a good converter for alignment, but I can set the alignment to 3 so it comes out right aligned and specify margins and a layout direction. So you'll notice there. You can only tell if the layout direction is wrong because the period comes out in the wrong place. It comes out here rather than wrapped in the window. If you change the layout direction the other day, you get it at the end of window where it should be. But the interesting part is here. We set the style sheet resources of label A, and I don't want to go into the whole syntax. It's based on cascading style sheets from HTML. We've told it on the style sheet on that widget, when I'm displaying a Q label, make the background green, the color white, and it comes out green and white. And on label B, I just set the background yellow, and I want a default style sheet for any widget. Set the style sheet to match whatever I am and make it red. And so this background came out red. So now you have all the opportunity and possible ugliness of being able to make all your colors come through a file that your user can edit, though in practice the users never did edit. One of the other things we've built recently is this XM form for those people who are lazy. Here it's an actual Q widget. We're going to rewrite it so it's a layout. We create 2 buttons in it, and then we have this horribly ugly set, variable arguments equivalent of the XT setars, where we do all the form attachments, and we get these two widgets attached like that. This is really not ready for public consumption yet because I don't like this interface. We're going to redo it as a layout and add layout with the various constraints that let you specify the attachments the right way. I wonder where we are. Oh, we're about right. We're a few minutes early. The summary is that there are lots of potential traps that you'll find, especially the nasties. The nasties is your old code may just not compile on newer systems that you want to go to. You have a lot of options available for dealing with this problem. You don't have to do the rewrite. The slow migration option is really a nice way to get into the Qt world slowly, and it's something I advise you to explore, even though it doesn't seem right. You know, you're not doing a port to Qt. And the early refactoring and porting helps immensely. The earlier you can start taking your Motif code and make it amenable to migration to Qt, the easier job you'll have later on. And your code will actually get better along the way by doing that early. And I can point you on to more stuff. The Trolltech site has, I guess if you web search for migration walkthrough, then you'll find it. It'll be in the Qt docs. I don't have the URL right to the Motif extension because it was just way too long to fit on the screen, and they might move it in the Qt Solutions portion of their homepage. Click through that, and eventually you'll find the Motif extension. This paper will be available here, or these notes, and they're going to be evolving over the next month or two, and we may put some examples there as well. I thank you all for being here today, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. If you want to see it running, or the dynamic styles,